Hey, this is Mikey with another After Effects tutorial. Today we're going to make this split prism and micro prism focus ring from an old SLR camera. Now there's a lot to this tutorial, lots of little details. We're going to do lots of pre-comping because there's several different compositions. This background you can see that as it splits, you can see the split where it focuses in this focus ring, and all these different things are all driven from one composition, so we can easily change out the footage. And then we'll also throw in some nice little touches like the little flip down look that we have here. Now, I do want to say a special thanks to all of my patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to learn more about my Patreon community and some of the perks and extra value you can get from that, just click on the link in the description, or there's also a link here on the video itself that'll take you there. Now, let's get started with a brand new composition. Okay, let's first bring in my footage. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-compose this so that I can easily swap out the footage in the future. So, highlight, Command-Shift-C, we'll pre-compose, call it footage, so it's easy to find, and it's good to go. Now, to drive this whole thing, we're going to have a null object with a slider on it so that we can control the focus of this. So let's bring in that null object now, give it a name, focus control, and on that we're going to add an expression control slider. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have that slider affect the size and the blurriness of this, so it kind of makes it go out of focus. And instead of using like the camera lens blur, which takes up a lot of resources, I'm just going to use a fast blur and then a scale. So we'll go fast blur and then also bring up scale. So let's add an expression to the blurriness. So hold down Option or Alt, click on the stopwatch, brings up the expression. Go down to the slider control. And then let's write a quick expression. We wanted to say math.abs, so that's capital M in math. And then in parentheses, we're going to grab that slider and let's divide it by, say, 2. I might adjust that later. Okay, looking good. And the reason what the math.abs is the absolute value. So if I go out of focus in negative numbers or in positive numbers, it'll still work. And then the same thing for the scale. Let's add an expression to that. Math.abs. And in parentheses, let's grab the slider. This time we're going to divide that by 6. And there's a warning, which is fine. What it's saying right here, expression result must be a dimension 2, not 1. I'm only sticking in one number here, even though you can see 2 numbers go there. So how we fix this is we write a quick variable. So I'm going to go to the beginning of this. Just call this F scale for focus scale. Equals, and add a semicolon at the end, and then in square brackets, not parentheses, but square brackets, put F scale, comma, F scale, and then second square bracket. And what we have here is, of course, it didn't do it quite right, because when this slider is set to 0, well, the scale is set to 0. We need to do one more thing to this. So before the bracket, just write value plus, and then I'll add that to it. And looking pretty good. I think it might be scaling a little bit too much. So let's come in here and maybe set that to divided by 8. Let's try 10. Okay, it's looking pretty good. Now, let's start to create some of the looks of this SLR. So what we have here is we've got this kind of this box overlay. We've got some dust on the backgrounds and things like that. So let's make that overlay. And I'm going to make that with just shape layers. But before I do, I'm going to bring up my rulers. I'm going to put in some markers. So I'm going to grab the edge here. And I'm at 1920 by 1080. So as I bring this ruler across, you can see up in this corner right there, there's the X and Y. And I want the X to be 960, because that's half of 1920. and then the Y to be 540. Okay, 2 guidelines right in the center. Now, what I want to do to create that that overlay is let's just use a shape layer. So I select my box, make sure there's no layer selected in the timeline, otherwise it's a mask tool. And let's go to the stroke. Let's set that to black, and the pixels to 4, and then the fill, we can, if we click right on fill, not on the color, we can set it to none. And then when I create this, you can see it's got a nice kind of a line image to it. So let's get this as center as we can, but to make it perfect, if we go down into the contents, into the rectangle, into the transform, you see that position is not quite zeroed out. Just hit 0 on both of those. Now, we also had this ring. Let's create that with the ellipse tool. Make sure your layer is selected so that we can have this all in a single shape layer. Makes things a little bit easier. Let's come down into the ellipse settings and 0 that out. Let's go ahead and duplicate that, and let's take the second ellipse and let's bring the size down, and then let's zoom in, grab just the pen tool, and I'm going to make a line and snap it to that center line. Alright, now what I need to do is add some masking to this. And when you mask a shape layer, you have to do actually an extra step. Since the mask tools and the shape layer tools are the same, what we have here is there's this little button that says tool creates shapes or tool creates masks. So let's go to the rectangle tool, make sure it's set on masks, and if I snap right into that center, that line, and then I hold down Command, it will keep it nice and centered. So there's that mask right there. I just want to mask the top. Let's set that to subtract. Let's duplicate that mask, hit Command T or Control T, and then we can move it down. Duplicate it again, Command T or Control T, make sure it's centered. Duplicate it again, Command T, and we'll move it over to this other side. Now it's a lot of masks, but in the end, it looks pretty good. And it's all on a single layer too, so that's nice. So let's just name that layer overlay. Okay, let's go ahead and hide these guidelines now. So if I hit Command and then the colon, it'll hide that. Now that we've got most of the parts, let's take this footage layer, let's duplicate it, and then we'll call this first one background. And to this background layer, let's add another effect. Let's go and add another flash blur. Make it kind of blurry. And then let's go down into the effects. If you're on After Effects CC, then what you can do is this compositing options. I'm going to hit plus, and then under effect opacity, I can bring that down. And you can see it adds just kind of a soft haze to it. And that's what I want. Now let's also go in and grab the rounded rectangle tool and just select the background, double click on the tool, and it'll round it. And then I'm going to add a feather to that. I wanted it to be just kind of darkened on the edges. Alright, looking pretty good. Now let's also add to this just maybe levels adjustment. Bring that down a little bit. Maybe bring the midpoint so it's a little bit more gray. And then lastly, I have this dust footage. Looks like just dust. Let's bring that right on top of the background. And then switch over to the modes and set this to, let's see what overlay looks like. Nope, not overlay. Screen. I like that. And let's bring the opacity down so it's not so intense. Okay. Maybe we'll even add to this a little bit of a blur. Just a fast blur will do. I think just 1 pixel is all it needs. Alright, so that is the background, these 2 layers. On top of that, we need to have 3 other layers. But before we do that, we need to create some mats because we're going to use track mats to do everything. So let's grab that overlay. I'm going to duplicate it. Let's go into the contents. Let's first delete the rectangle and the shape. And then to the contents, I'm going to add a merge paths. Make sure the fill is on in the merge paths. Let's do subtract. And then switch the order of the ellipse So ellipse 1 is on top, ellipse 2 is on bottom, and it should create a ring like this. Let's go ahead and make that fill black. Okay, let's give that a name. Ring matte. Duplicate that. Let's go ahead and hide that matte, that first one. Go into the contents, and we can delete ellipse 1 and the merge paths and the stroke. And then we're going to mask this. So remember, with the rectangle mask, any mask on a shape layer, we need to select this button here. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up my guides again, so that's just Command or Control and the semicolon key. So it snaps right to that line. And I can delete all these other masks as well. Okay, so we just want a top half. So we're going to call this Split U for upper, duplicate it, Split L for lower. And on the lower one, let's set the mask to subtract. So then we have a lower, an upper, and a ring. Okay, looking pretty good. Let's take all 4 of these and bring them down here below everything. We want this overlay to be on top. Now let's take that background footage again, duplicate it, bring one below the split L, duplicate it, bring one above the split U, and then one above the ring mat, or below it. So we can turn all those on so they're visible. So then what we do is just a track matte on the footage layer, track matte to the one above it, track matte to the one above that, and on the ring, track matte to the one above that. Okay, so what we have here is if I were to move the position of that footage, you can see that the bottom one is moving. So let's actually name that. Footage L for lower, footage U for upper, and footage ring. You can see each of them are moving independently of each other. Pretty cool. Okay, we're about there. We can see on this focus control, it's going to control all the layers, how they are. But what we need is we need this split prism on the inside to move side to side. So let's take the footage L and bring up the position. So I hit P on the keyboard. Make sure down here also the slider is accessible so we can pick whip to it because we're going to write an expression. So hold down Option or Alt, click on the stopwatch. Let's first write a variable. So we just call this focus move. So F move equals math.abs because we want the absolute value on this as well. And then in parentheses, let's pick whip that slider and then close parentheses and a semicolon. Now that we have a variable, we can stick it into this. So let's go value, that's the position, plus, and then square bracket, F move, comma, 0, close with square bracket, and semicolon. And then what we have here is as I move this, you can see it's sliding. And I actually don't want absolute value in this one, I realized. So let's delete that. Some of them you need it, some of them you don't. And this one you don't. Because we want it to go each way, like that. Okay, looking pretty good. Now I'm just going to copy this, and let's put it on the position for the upper footage. Paste that. But instead of just leaving it how it is, I need to take in here where it says value plus and put value minus. Let's take a look at that. Looking pretty good. I think I want maybe this footage in the center to scale a little bit more than the rest of the footage. So I'm going to highlight both those layers, hit S, and remember we have this on here, this expression already. So let's set that to back to 6 on these two. And that expression's already there because we just duplicated the layer. Let's try 4. Because it's in the center, so it's not going to show much. Alright, I like that. Okay, now let's create this focus ring. And to create that, I'm going to bring up my guides again. And I'm going to bring in 4 more guides. So I'm going to just have these at 10 pixels away. So this will be 970, 950. And I'm just looking at the guide position. You can see right there, it shows the guide position. Okay. Because I'm going to create a shape layer. So what I'm creating is, you can see this kind of this diamond pattern. That's what I'm going to create now. Sometimes it's easier to do that with the guides there. So let's just make sure nothing is selected. Grab the pen tool and let's create a triangle. And you can see I just snapped to those guides. I actually have to kind of click off to the side and then move them into place, because otherwise you don't have the pen tool. It just gives you the arrows to move the guides. But let's come into this content, into the shape. We do want to fill and we don't want to stroke. So this fill though, we want it to be kind of a gray. Now let's just do 3 more. Change the fill color of that one. And then 1 more triangle. So you want some dark, you want some light, and you don't want them kind of right next to each other. So something about like that. Let's give this the name. We'll call this Prism. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the repeater to repeat this several times. And it might be a little bit small, but that's fine. I can come into this, and if I add to that a group, it's like a folder or a pre-comp inside of shape layers. I can move everything into the group, and then the group has its own transform, which then I can scale this up until it's about the size I want. Let's go just full 200. Okay. So now in the contents, let's add to that a repeater, and then go ahead and duplicate that repeater. Let's go into repeater 1, into the transform. Go ahead and hide repeater 2, it'll be easier. Change the position so it's just touching. That's perfect. And then also on repeater 2, we need to change the position. So we're probably 20 on that, because the other one was 40, and 20 on that. And you can see everything is just kind of lined up like that, and that's what we want to do. Let's go ahead and repeat that out, and we need it just big enough to cover the ring, this outside ring. So I'm going to go ahead and move this so the top is up above, and that's big enough there. That's the second repeater, and then on the first one, let's bring more copies that way. Okay, everything seems to be covered up just fine. Perfect. So now what we can do is let's take that ring mat. Let's bring the prism, bring it right there by the ring mat. Actually, let's bring it above the ring mat. And let's duplicate that ring mat, so there's 2 of them, and bring that above the prism. And we're going to use that as well as an alpha mat. Let's take the ring mat and the prism, the one I just made, let's pre-compose those so it's all in one. So let's call this ring map. Looking pretty good. And then on this footage ring, we're going to add an effect. Let's go down to Distort, Displacement Map. And let's take from that displacement map the ring map. And you can see here, it's starting to create kind of a displacement, like it's a prism. That's really cool looking. But we need to drive this from this focus control. So let's go into this. And what I'm going to do is math.abs for absolute value. And in parentheses, let's grab that slider, times that by 2, and then close parenthesis. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this expression, because we want that on this vertical one as well. So now, you can see there's a little bit of a problem here where when I scale this up, it's scaling up that effect as well, and I don't want to do that. And so there's a way around that. And what I'm going to do is I come down to this footage, and I'm going to come into that scale, copy that expression. Actually, I'm just going to cut it because I don't want it there at all. And let's go to that footage layer, add effect to it, distort, transform, and put this transform above everything. And then let's add that expression to that scale instead. And it's going to have to be a little bit different because this scale is only a value of 1 and the other one was a value of 2. So let's just write F scale instead of in the brackets. And then what that's going to do is it's going to scale that with an effect, and so it won't scale everything else. Okay, looking pretty good. The last thing I need to do is I want to add some shading to this. So let's take that ring map. If we turn it on, and then multiply that on, and bring the opacity down. Yeah, it's kind of a nice shading effect to this. Let's have that set to, say, 30. And then we can have that controlled by the focus controller as well. And this is at about 90. So what we can do is this opacity, set that to math.abs. And then in parentheses, let's grab that 90 divided by 3 so we get the 30. End with a parenthesis. And then we've got that focus ring as well. So that is all of the controls to make this thing work for focusing. And again, it's all controlled by just a single layer. A single slider works pretty good. So what I want to do is let's do just a quick animation and add the shutter effect. So maybe it starts off out of focus, keyframe the slider, overshoots it a little bit, getting closer, go to the -1 and 0. And I think it's moving a little bit too fast, so I'm going to highlight all those keyframes, hold down Option, and just drag it out. And let's have it out of focus even more to begin with. All right, and then we're going to take a picture. So I could, probably the easiest way is just to pre-compose everything and do this, but I want to show you a different way, and that's if I use an adjustment layer. Let's just go ahead and chop it right there. That's Option or Alt and the left bracket. And in this adjustment layer, it will affect everything below it. So let's go ahead and grab some effects. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a warp effect. And in the obsolete, we have this basic 3D. And then distort, I want to transform. And then also I want to add some motion blur to this with the force motion blur. Now again, I said it's going to be probably easier just to pre-compose this, but I wanted to show you a different way of doing this. Just so you have the option. And plus, it's nice because then we can have everything all in the same composition and be able to see all the layers. So what I'm going to do is let's turn on this warp, and I want to set this to, say, arc lower. Let's go arc upper. That's the one I want. Okay, and let's set that to 0. Keyframe the bend. Also, we're going to keyframe the tilt. And then on transform, we're going to keyframe the position. Go forward, maybe 3 frames. Bring the bend up. Bring the tilt down. And we can bring the bend up a lot more that way. And then the position down off the frame. And then what we see is it kind of, you can see this falling down effect, like the mirror is moving out of place. And we turn on the force motion blur, and we get some motion blur. Now at this point, I'm going to cut the adjustment layer and add a new solid, a just black layer, comp size. And then at this point, right there where his elbow's up, that's where we want to have the picture come up. So let's take that background, duplicate it, bring it to the top. Go ahead and remove all these effects. Find the spot where his elbow is about right there. And then come into Layer, Time, Freeze Frame. And move this to that point. So it comes up like that. Okay, let's mask this so it's more of a photograph shape. Gonna have to remove the mask on that as well, but let's mask this so it's more of a photograph shape. Maybe we can add to this black and white. So go to Effect, Color Correction, Hue and Saturation. Bring the saturation down to 0. And then let's add behind this, I'm going to just grab a new solid, make it white. Let's crop it to the same size in the timeline. And then let's grab the crop tool and just add a quick border around this. Okay, let's take a look at this fully rendered out. Okay, I'm going to change my comp area to the work area. Looking pretty good. So the whole focus is going a little bit too fast at the beginning. That's just messing with keyframes and timing. But there it is. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Just put them in the comments below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to learn more about Patreon and the different perks and added value I have over there, feel free to just click on the link in the description. I'd love to have you join over there. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.